Hello everyone and welcome to the February 2024 edition of Fix Online. We are live streaming this event to the Finger on the Pulse, the Facebook group for Fix Online, and the Zoom video will be posted afterwards, usually up to a couple of days later, depending on the circumstances and how much I have to get my son to chop out. And that is on my Helen Claire Gould channel on YouTube. So please do subscribe and point all your friends towards it. If you wish to join the Finger on the Pulse, please ask to do so. You can message me on Facebook to ask for an invitation. There are a few rules to review and some questions to answer, but the group is both for readers and for listeners. Okay, so at our Fix live events, when we were in the pub, we used to have a books table. Now, we can't do that with Fix Online, but for our authors reading here this afternoon, please post your book details in the chat. Do include your website along with a link to the ebook and the seller or sellers for the print version. Prices would be helpful, and an ISBN and or ASIN if you have it. On Amazon Kindle, the ASIN should take readers straight to the book. Now, this can be done at the end or anytime during the show while you're not reading, and I'll post all the details with the live stream and the video or in the comments below it as appropriate. So today, all our readers are returning guests, and of those, one is based in the US and the rest of us in the UK. We have got another lady in from the US to just along for the ride, and another lady from nearby also along for the ride. So now please unmute everybody as we join our first author with her humorous dark fantasy story. So to kick it off this month, please give it up for Carman and Twicetime.
Thank you.
I should say you can't see Carol at the moment because she's having a bit of technical problems as well. So yeah, but she's in fine voice and all ready to go, aren't you, Carol?
I am, thank you. So I suppose for viewers, it'll be like listening to the radio. So it'll be a test of my acting skills. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Helen, for this opportunity to read.
No worries.
I've got a note in my notes here. It says, hold up the book. So there you go. I'm holding the book up. Today in the book, we're in Castle Stein, which is the ancestral home of Lady Rosa. And her dissolute husband, Rudolph, has just blown up the West Wing Tower while illicitly mixing a love potion in her laboratory as she was in a meeting at the castle with the chief alchemist. The laboratory was destroyed and Rudolph landed in the moat. So here we go. Castle Stein is the second oldest thing in Maund. The oldest thing is the University of Nature, the seat of learning, witchcraft and natural sciences, popularly known as the Union. And nobody knows how old that is. The best guess is that the Union was already ancient when time immemorial was born. The ancestral fortress of a family so long established that their history isn't so much recorded as fossilised, Castle Stein stands proud and unapologetic on a moat-surrounded mound, a magnificent showpiece of the rock which gives the Steins, quarrymasters, aristocrats, eccentrics, their fortune. Those who built the castle intended it to be a bastion against weather, armed insurrection, personal grudge and drawbridge merchants. Hewn limestone blocks were shaped not only into walls and floors, but also into tables, chests, cupboards, shelves, and anything else it would have been quicker, easier, and cheaper to have made out of wood. A double-thickness drawbridge spans the moat, and when raised, completely covers the castle's portcullis gate, although centuries of peace have rusted the portcullis mechanism, and it no longer drops down to impale invaders or frustrate their swordplay. Immediately behind the portcullis gate, unlike many other castles, is Castle Stein's front door, which opens directly into the Great Hall. The first Stein reasoned that if marauders did get across the drawbridge and past the portcullis, they'd have to turn around and leave because there'd be no large open courtyard to stable the horses and camp out in while they ransacked the place. and even the most savage barbarian doesn't want the living quarters carpeted by horse manure, especially when he's gone to so much trouble to obtain them in the first place. But that kind of logic was to be expected from a man who'd have put stone doors and shutters on the place, except he couldn't find any hinges strong enough. When he placed the original cornerstone centuries ago, the first Stein thought he was laying the foundations of a dynasty which would fill this castle and others like it all over the world for many generations to come. Alas, what the Steins were blessed with in tenacity they failed to match in number, and if the Stein line had soaked deep into history's pages, it had been drawn with a very fine nib. And so numerous empty rooms line long drafty corridors, and everyday life takes place mostly within a stone's throw of the Great Hall, which is much the same as entrance halls the world over, except for the huge stone fireplace, the sweeping stone staircase with its carved stone balustrade, and the life-size stone reindeer that are used as cloak stands. Thick hawsers lowered huge beams, and before long Rudolph's wet feet were slapping across the drawbridge and onto the stone flags of the Great Hall. "Fetch a towel, Beaton, then run me a bath." "Very good, my lord." Beaton bowed and headed for a pair of double doors that were flung open as a distraught Rosa ran into the hall. She stopped when she saw the bedraggled Rudolph, breeches torn, sloshing over to the fireplace. "Ye gods!" she cried. "You're still alive!" "So I am." He started to wring out his waistcoat, and small rivulets ran into the fire, sizzling and spitting. Rosa paced back and forth behind him. "That's bloody typical of you. You blow up the castle and don't even have the decency to die in the explosion." "Must be my lucky day." "Lucky day?" "There's nothing wrong with your hearing, then." "The only thing wrong with me is that I didn't stab you with a cake knife at the wedding." "I wish I'd stabbed your father." Rosa began. That man, Rudolph shouted her down, "ruined my life." She stopped pacing and put her hands on her hips. "As I recall, it was your father who ruined my life by selling you into marriage for more money to gamble away." Rudolph spun round to face her. Drops of moat water lashed from his shirt flaps and breeches onto the fire, where they hissed and raged. "Your father promised me half his fortune." "And you've already had half of it." "Those pitiful bits you give me? Don't make me laugh." "I won't," she said. "I'm going to make you cry." "Beaten?" "Stop whining, woman. It was only your laboratory." "Only my laboratory? Only my life's work?" The double doors opened, and Beaton entered, carrying a large towel. Rudolph took it from him. "I don't know why you're making such a fuss, Rosa." "No, you don't, do you? Because you haven't even got enough brains to be a half-wit." He waved at her dismissively. You have absolutely no conception of the enormity of what you've done, have you? So I'll give you a clue. Beaton set fire to the games room." Beaton stooped to juggle a couple of burning coals onto the fireside shovel. "You touch that games room, Beaton, and you're a dead butler," said Rudolph, drying his face and hair with a towel. Beaton straightened up again. "My lord?" Rosa adopted that reasonable, smiling tone of voice used by those wishing to gently illustrate a foregone conclusion. "Beaton, who pays your wages?" "My lady, my lady." "And who will drink and gamble us into bankruptcy?" "My lord, my lady." Rudolph stopped rubbing his hair and draped the towel around his neck. He sighed. All right. He looked at her with the air of one about to undergo some waste of time in order to placate those in charge. "I'm sorry about the lab," he said with a practiced false sincerity. "But if you get the builders in, you can carry on your little hobby in no time." "Little hobby," Rosa snarled. "Little hobby." She clenched her teeth and growled, bending and flexing her fingers as she moved towards Rudolph. He started to back away. Now, Rosa, you're just a bit wound up. You know how tense you get around this time of the month." "How dare you!" She lunged, grabbed his waistcoat and pulled it down over his shoulders, trapping his arms, then barreled him against the wall, knocking the wind out of him. As he buckled, she gripped the towel and kicked his feet from under him. As he fell, she went with him, slamming his aristocratic features into the stone flags. She sat on his back and twisted the towel tighter. "Now listen to me, you inbred imbecile," she hissed. "You may have ruined my life's work, but no more will you ruin my life. Beaten, fetch the chief alchemist and some rope." Rudolph called down all manner of curses upon Rosa's head during the ensuing short struggle, which culminated in him being spread-eagled on his back on a billiard table, hands and feet securely anchored at the corner pockets, courtesy of the rope-tying skills of Beaton, founder and life president of Mourned Knotologists, and the iron grip of Redvers Midicole, chief alchemist, whose day had taken a distinctly more exciting turn. "I'll get you for this, Rosa!" Rosa smiled at her marital millstone. "Will you? Oh dear, how tiresome. You'll pay for this!" "I did pay for it. I pay for everything in this castle, which means I can dispose of it as I please, and that includes you." "At least untie my hands." "Are you uncomfortable?" "Of course I'm uncomfortable, you hell hag. It's a bloody billiard table, not a bed." Rosa feigned surprise. "But you spent so many nights sprawled across this thing in a drunken stupor. I thought you'd feel right at home." "You crazy cow, you're mad." Rosa slapped her hand over his mouth and put her face closer to his than it had ever been. "Rudolph, for once in your miserable little life," her eyes narrowed and glittered as she patted his cheek, "you're right. Beaton, would you ask Mrs. B for a jug of water and a slice of bread, please? Oh, and a knife, a bowl of dripping, and a cake icing syringe." "Thank you."
Wow. So please unmute yourselves now, and let's have a big hand for Carol, Carman, and the mysteriously named Twicetime.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to read for you.
Well read, Carol, and in spite of not being able to see you, it was still a great reading.
Thank you.
So, yeah, that's fabulous.
Yeah, I thought it was fantastic.
Oh,
Right.
Thank you very much, Steve. That's great.
I could see there was, beams of approval actually going on there. So.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Loved it.
Okay, so, and now we have, oh, excuse me. And now we have this month's American author with the third in his Reality Gradient trilogy, which began with Models and Citizens and progressed to Bodhi Rising. So will you now please show your appreciation for Chuck, writing as Andrew Sweet and reading from his latest novel in the series, Libera, Goddess of Worlds. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm reading from a chapter somewhere within. At this point, this is Mijluk is a virtual world, and this is going to feel very much like a murder investigation type of thing. So just bear with me. There's science fiction, I promise. Spurned Love, Friday, November 12th, 2258. Lothania, Desiree, Mijluk. Lincoln parked at the free lot near the sheriff's office just after midday. She timed her arrival for when he returned from lunch, hopefully in a good mood. The air had a chill in it, and the leaves on the poplar trees that graced each side of the entrance were bright orange and red. The wind blew in short bursts as she approached the glass door with his name and title displayed prominently across the front. The giant sticker letters looked like they hadn't changed since the late 2230s, except maybe to fade a little. He sat behind his desk, finishing up a hamburger and dripping mustard from his bottom lip, which he wiped away with the back of his right hand. Lincoln crossed the open office floor over linoleum tiles as cautiously as though she traversed a warm rope bridge. When he smiled that warm smile he sometimes got after a good sandwich, she took the seat next to his desk. "Miss Montague," he greeted her in a slightly patronizing way, "how may I help you?" I found more evidence." His smile faltered, and as effortless as it seemed just seconds before, suddenly appeared to take a great deal more work for him to maintain. Lincoln didn't hesitate to drop the sandwich bag containing the earring on the table in front of him. He talked. That's an earring. Judging by the design, probably your mother's. What does that have to do with her closed case? It's not hers. I have all of hers, every single one. This one I haven't seen before. It belongs to someone else. The swish of the door brushing against the linoleum floor caught Lincoln's attention, and the bench by the door creaked as someone sat on it. Could belong to anyone, he told her, as his attention shifted from her to whoever had entered. Lincoln turned around on the plastic seat as best she could, and felt flushed as she recognized the woman who had just come in. Bright blue eyes and golden hair framed a smile, filled with straight white teeth. She regained her composure and quickly flashed a smile of her own. Lincoln, the woman said, I didn't know you were here. How are you, dear? Fine, Katie, just trying to convince the sheriff to reopen my mother's case. Same as usual, then. I hope you find what you're looking for, Katie said, then scrunched her eyes up as they fell in the plastic bag. Is that what will do it? It's an earring. Lotus flower. Do you know whose it is? Something flashed across Katie's face as she stared at the contents of the plastic bag, or so Lincoln thought. It could have been that Katie recognized it, but Lincoln guessed the look had more to do with Katie's daughter, Sarah. Listen, dear, Katie said. Sarah told me about the other morning. She finally worked up the courage to tell you how she feels. Did you know she'd been practicing all summer? I'm sorry? Lincoln felt her legs begin to weaken and her heart thumped loudly in her chest. Are you sure this thing you're doing is worth losing her? I don't want to talk about that here, Katie. You can understand. Sure, dear, I'm just saying that perhaps you should consider her feelings. Lincoln could feel her cheeks flush with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. She grabbed the bag from the table and stood up abruptly. Anger flowed through her veins like scalding lava, leaving behind the red flush of shame as it exploded from her heart to her skin. I'm sure Katie has more important things to talk about than my mother's murder, she scolded, and exited the office without waiting for Sheriff Al's response. Thank you, dear. Lincoln heard Katie say something else, but she was through the door and out on the sidewalk by that point. Directly in front of her, seated in the passenger seat of the Douglas's truck, sat Sarah, staring straight at her. Lincoln turned quickly to the right and headed down the street toward the free lot where she had parked earlier. As she felt the heat growing around her ears, she wanted to go home. She made her way toward the free lot, trying to ignore the prickly feeling in her neck, telling her that Sarah's eyes had never left her. Had it been any other day, Lincoln would have approached Sarah to complain about her bitchy mother's overuse of the word dear. Lincoln visualized a mental image of her and Sarah laughing together. Instead of decompressing from the stressful encounter, Lincoln now stomped across the sidewalk, poisoned by Katie's words. The lot approached rapidly, and Lincoln fished her keys from her pocket, only to have them slide to the ground by her car's front passenger door. That was the last embarrassment she could take. Her resolve melted as the keys bounced and jangled against the pavement, and tears rushed to her eyes as she bent down to pick them up as casually as she could. If she kept her back to where the truck was parked, then at least Sarah wouldn't see her crying. Lincoln struggled to reach the keys through tears when she saw that they lay just beneath the front tire, about where she had found the earring in relation to the same car back on the farm. That sparked a thought that the earring may have fallen out of the automobile. She opened the driver's door and slid into the seat, and then she leaned her head back, in part to regain her composure, unsure that the embarrassment had passed yet. She attempted to visualize the automobiles that were there when she had arrived home from school the day her mother had died. She didn't remember seeing any cars when she got home. Was it possible that the earring had belonged to her mother after all? No, Lincoln wouldn't admit that. The earring was essential to discovering the cause of her mother's death. She struggled to remember. With the wake and all, there had been hundreds of people on the property. A voice broke through her thoughts. Do you have a problem with me? Sarah asked through the inch-wide crack on the driver's side window. Lincoln hadn't heard her approach. She bit her lip. What do you mean? You walked right past me and didn't even stop. I followed you for like a block and you didn't turn around. Are you avoiding me now? I'm not avoiding you, Sarah, she said. I just wasn't ready. Ready for what? It's still me, Lincoln. Remember? Your friend your whole life? I took a chance and I knew it would be weird, but you're not even trying. It's not you, Sarah. I'm not even sure how I feel about what you said. It's just my mother. It's always your mother, Link. She's dead. I love you, and I'm alive, and I'm here right now, and I've always been here. Lincoln gasped and rolled the window up hastily, blocking out any more of Sarah's words. Every single day, Lincoln woke up with a hole in her heart that her mother had once filled. Every single day. She went to bed most nights feeling the same emptiness that kept her at arm's distance from her birth community. It was as though Lincoln lived in a completely separate universe, a universe that had stopped all movement when her mother had died. Her universe had killed itself, and all that she had left was the decreasing expulsion of heat as motion slowly came to a stop. Sarah, of all people, knew that, and knew how hard it was some days for Lincoln to get out of bed. Bitch, she muttered. Lincoln revved the engine once to warn Sarah to back up, because even if Sarah had hurt her, Lincoln still didn't want to run over her feet. Lincoln was fucking thoughtful that way. She shifted into gear and backed the sedan out of the parking lot, close enough to scare Sarah but not to hit her. And then she drove, but only for a block before pulling into a back alley and placing the car in park. Her hands shook. She was in no condition to drive, and she knew it. Trapped in the automobile, Lincoln bit back her tears, unsure if they were tears of rage or anguish. She wouldn't let them fall. She gritted her teeth tightly and breathed in and out through her clenched jaw. For a moment, she believed that the building anger would overwhelm her and force loose the tears that she resisted shedding. But as she sat, she thought about the earring and how much closer she might be to finding her mother's killer. Sarah or no Sarah, she had a new lead. This knowledge lifted her anxiety and pulled her spirits up enough so that she no longer had to worry about crime, though she was still too flustered to drive. Her mobile phone rang in her pocket, providing a welcome distraction to her betraying mind. Lincoln? Came a man's voice on the other side. There's something you should know. Who is this? Has it been that long? Sheesh, I guess so. Scott Beck? She got a mental flash of his bright yellow sports car with 2 black stripes down the center over the hood. He loved that car. Are you still investigating? I am, she said, tried to settle her breathing. You know, I'm friends with David McGinnis. We were talking about, well, I don't remember. There may have been drinking involved. Anyway, he said there's a note. David, the paramedic? Yeah, that's him. He said your mother addressed it to someone named Jordan Helm, and they kept it in evidence without opening it. He said they were going to open it if the coroner said there was actually a crime, but I'm sorry, I'm being insensitive. No, continue, please. I'm sure I've heard it all before. Coroner said it was suicide, so the note stayed in evidence. Lincoln, it might still be there. Thank you. Stop there.
Brilliant. So, please unmute now, and let's hear it again for Andrew Sweet and his latest novel in the Reality Gradient series, Libera, Goddess of Worlds. Well read, I have to say.
Intriguing, that was, yeah.
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 I like the gumshoe aspect of it. I've always liked the, gumshoe type stories, so I love that.
So now, thank you, Andrew, or Chuck. So now our next guest reader is Sandra, and she has her second novel out. It's from the same publisher, isn't it, Sandra?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so can you please mute yourselves during the reading? But first, let's have a warm welcome for Sandra Bond reading an extract from The Devil's Finger.
Yeah, thank you. Right, we are in a fictional town in Derbyshire for this extract. We have 3 characters, which is Jemima, who's a middle-aged comedian, Imogen, who's her PA, and a local mythology hunter called Martin, who are being chased by the local monstrous cryptid, the Beast of Belsnade, which is a local myth that's linked to the local standing stone, which is called the Devil's Finger, hence the title, which is also the name of the local pub. The stile at the bottom of the hill seemed suddenly to be 20 feet high. Imogen grabbed the wooden bar at the top and hurtled over it with strength she had no idea she could call upon. Jemima fell against the wooden structure, gasping for breath. "Leave me," she panted. "No, I'll slow you down." Imogen looked back. A dark shape was cantering down the path, coming closer to them with each second. Martin grabbed Jemima physically and heaved. Imogen reached out and caught hold of Jemima's blouse, which ripped as Jemima grasped the stile. Somehow she rolled over it and fell to earth on the other side. Martin threw himself at the stile and bundled himself over it, as Imogen, still holding Jemima's collar, hauled upward. The collar parted from Jemima's brows entirely, just as she regained her feet. Imogen nearly fell over herself, recovered her balance somehow. "The keys," Martin panted. Jemima staggered toward the car, handbag falling open and dropping her belongings in her wake, marking her route like a trail of breadcrumbs in a fairy story. As she reached the car and jabbed the key fob button to unlock it, Liam Baxter vaulted the stile in one swift, predatory movement. Jemima jammed the keys into the ignition as Martin ran around the car toward the passenger door. Imogen threw herself into the back seat headlong. The engine burst into life and Jemima gunned the throttle. Back door swinging open, beating a back and forth tattoo against Imogen's feet. The car veered around and headed for the road. "He's behind us," panted Martin, head twisted to look over his shoulder. Imogen dragged herself half upright in the back seat and looked through the rear windscreen. Now that they were under street lights, she could see quite clearly the wild animal face that had once been Liam Baxter's. He was scarcely 10 feet behind them. Her eyes met Baxter's for a second. They held a cold animal hatred. A detached part of Imogen's mind wondered whether it came from the transformation he had undergone, or whether it was merely the same emotion that she'd generally seen Baxter's eyes display. "Look out!" Martin yelled, and the car hit a speed bump with a force that made Imogen's jaws close and her teeth clashed together painfully. A grinding noise came from under the car, the sump scraping a gouge in the tarmac of the road surface, and the engine coughed with the sudden deceleration. "If she stalls," thought Imogen, "we're dead." The engine somehow recovered and the car picked up speed. Baxter dropped away behind. Then they reached another speed bump. Jemima braked for this one. The reduction in speed avoided the jarring impact, but allowed Baxter to come up on their tail again. "He's coming!" Imogen squealed. Jemima put her foot back down, but as the car accelerated, Baxter sprang. He landed with his hands between the back windscreen and the boot and his feet on the rear bumper. "Shit!" Imogen heard herself yell. Jemima began to swing the wheels back and forth, trying to shake the hitchhiker off. Martin reached across Jemima and jammed his hand down on the central boss of the steering wheel. The car horn began to blare. Baxter was still clinging on when they reached another speed bump. Jemima had to slow down once more, and he used the respite to haul himself up onto the boot. Drawing back one arm, he punched at the glass once, twice, 3 times. Imogen screwed her eyes shut, waiting for the feel of glass fragments raining down onto her face, shortly to be followed by the feel of the beast's claws. But somehow they didn't come, as they left the bump in their wake, and Jemima began trying to shake Baxter loose once more. Martin was still playing a solo on the car horn, and lights were beginning to come on in some of the houses along the street. They took one more speed bump like an Olympic hurdler, and then came the little roundabout at the bottom of the street. "Go round!" shouted Martin, and Jemima went round, gravel flying from her wheels. Baxter lurched sideways, almost losing his grip, then regaining it. Jemima circled the roundabout twice, then jerked the wheel the other way, and they were back off in the direction they'd come, up the high street again. The speed camera next to the roundabout flashed. "Fuck off!" snarled Jemima, as though the camera was the last straw, or perhaps it was addressed to Baxter. At the third speed bump on the return journey, Baxter swung at the glass once more, and it finally gave way. Imogen had had time to pull herself properly upright, and she shrank to the side of the back seat furthest from Baxter as his dark, furred arm came swinging into the inside of the car, clawing for her. Jemima veered back into the pub car park. "You're forgetting, Baxter," she howled. "I'm from Liverpool." And she threw the wheel sideways, sending the car into a tight donut in front of the Devil's Finger. This time, the momentum was enough to send Baxter flying off his perch on the car and make him somersault in the gravel. It looked painful. Imogen wondered whether Baxter felt pain in his new form. If he did, it didn't stop him regaining his feet quickly and chasing the car as Jemima accelerated out of the car park again. "Go the other way," Imogen yelled. Jemima jerked the wheel around and drove straight at Baxter. He sprang out of the way with contemptuous ease. Imogen was scrabbling around the car for a weapon, but there was nothing. Again, Jemima drove at Baxter, and again he dodged. This time, though, he leapt back onto the car. There was an ominous thud above Imogen's head as he landed on the roof. Jemima swung out of the car park and headed north, away from the speed bumps, away from the village. The beast's hand reached through the broken rear windscreen again, claws stretching towards Imogen. Her fingers touched something on the back parcel shelf as she shrank away from the Baxter monster. She grabbed it and swung at the intruding limb. There was a ripping sound, and the impromptu weapon tore almost in half. She'd been trying to defend herself with a copy of the London A to Z. "Look out!" yelled Martin. Imogen looked round to the direction of travel, just in time to see another pair of headlights closing upon them. Jemima jerked the wheel sideways, and they missed the oncoming vehicle by the width of one of the A to Z's torn pages. Jemima struggled to keep control and failed. The car zigzagged along the grass verge for a couple of bumpy seconds, then tipped sideways into the ditch, coming to rest at an angle. Momentum propelled Baxter forward off the roof, and Imogen lost sight of him as she landed in a heap of torn paper and broken glass against the inside of the back passenger door. She reached up for the other door, shoved it open, scrambling out to land in a heap on the verge. Jemima and Martin were still inside the car. Every instinct in Imogen's brain and Imogen's legs wanted to run, but she forced herself to try and open the driver's door, knowing as she did so that she'd never manage to get Jemima out. The angle was too great. Jemima weighed too much, and Martin was in the seat beyond her, his escape blocked. An engine sounded behind her and braked to a halt. "Is it the police?" Imogen wondered. "Have they come to save us?" No, there were no blue lights, no sirens. A few feet away, Baxter had regained his feet and was ready to charge. "Get down!" snapped a male voice. Imogen knew it but couldn't place it. Her mind was in too great a whirl. But her legs were all too glad of the excuse to give way and let her sink to the cold, welcoming earth. Should she try to make herself as small as possible so the beast wouldn't see her? Wasn't that what you were meant to do? If you were attacked by a grizzly bear, of course, the beast wasn't a bear. A thundering roar came from behind and above her. A second quickly followed. The beast that was Liam Baxter whirled around once and fell. "Gotcha, you bastard! Gotcha at last!" With her very last atoms of consciousness, Imogen looked up to see the coldly smiling figure of Brian McGewick, dressed in pyjamas and slippers, a shotgun raised to his shoulder. Thank you.
Wow, that's pretty action-packed, that was. Can you please unmute and put your hands together again for Sandra Bond and the Devil's Finger? Oh my God, something's happened in domestic disaster here. I'll try and find out what's happening. Right, okay, so next reader. So we welcome now the return of Steve with his latest fantasy offering, and it is fantasy, but is there humour in it as well, Steve?
Yeah, it's what I like to call a folk punk fantasy. There's enough swearing and destruction to make it punk, but there's a lot of mythology, and I've taken stuff from folk tales and from traditional English fairy tales, as well as like traditional high fantasy and things like that. So
Wow.
it's a mixture of the two.
Right. Oh.
So it's from my book, which currently has no distribution except for me in my house, which I'll post out. It's the Tales of Robin Goodfellow, and if you know anything about Shakespeare, which I do, Robin Goodfellow, or Puck as he was known, was in Midsummer Night's Dream, and he was one of my all-time favorite characters. And I just wanted to completely do something different with it. And
so let's go on an exploration now with Steve and with the Tales of Robin Goodfellow.
Right. So I'll be reading from the story The Black Rose, which is gruesome in parts, but lots of fun. All right. The police cordon had started halfway down the street, but all she had to do was flash her ELO identification, and she was straight through. She looked down at the monkey, who held out his hand expectantly. Then, fishing a shilling from her pocket, she tossed it to him and headed towards the club. The stench was palpable, even from outside. It permeated in the metallic, coppery way that always sank deep into her tongue and refused to go for hours. Seems like someone had fun last night, Barnabas said, with a chuckle inside her head. It was New Year's Eve. Someone had to have fun. Why not the dead? She said under her breath, so as not to attract any more strange looks. Most of the coppers looked at her oddly when they saw her approach with the guitar case, then looked away and cracked their jokes in typical police fashion. Lola did not care. It was not like it was the first time she had drawn such attention. Tup Tup Palace was an old-school nightclub with a seedy client base. It was a local hot spot for celebrities, fashionistas, aspiring musicians, and entrepreneurs. Its customers, mostly humans wanting to be alpha, would pack the club to its fullest, night after night, their bodies gyrating against one another in a torrid orgy of alcohol, drugs, and bad decisions. Lola could smell the sex the moment she stepped into the place. That and the blood. Right now, Tup Palace was far from the haven of good times for which it had the reputation. At this very moment, it was littered with the bodies of its clientele. Just not the kind the owners preferred. The interior was small by nightclub standards. Even if the punters hadn't been torn apart and their limbs and organs strewn about the place, there would have been little room to move. By all accounts, it was a packed house, but then again, it was bound to be on New Year's Eve. Not that Lola even went out on New Year's. From what little clothing remained amongst the blood and gore, she could tell the crowd was primarily young, possibly students out for a night of questionable judgment and carefree excitement. A veritable river of blood clotted across the wood paneling floorboards. It had been some hours since the massacre, so most of it was thickly set and black by now. Lola had to swat what little flies were surrounding her from her face more than once. More blood and gore was plastered across the walls and ceiling. This sort of thing never ends well, she said to herself. The best parties never do, Barnabas said with a hiss and a chuckle. Whoever threw this party had style, I tell you. Are you picking anything up? Any residual magical energy or wayward presence? She asked. Barnabas rattled around in the guitar case, making a thudding noise as if trying to get out before falling silent. I'll take that as a no, she said wearily. Across the scene of gore and destruction, on a dais where the DJ stand was, she saw an elderly detective making notes and talking to a forensic scientist and his team. He was typical of the profession. In fact, Lola thought he looked like he had walked straight off an ITV drama, the kind her dad used to like watching when he was sick. He was squat and pudgy, but neatly dressed in the typical grey suit and tie fashion most detectives kept their appearances in. As she trudged her way across the anarchy and came closer, she grinned at the stereotypical thick grey moustache and thinning grey hairline gelled tightly to his scalp. If only her dad could have seen him. Houston flecked the entrails off her cowboy boots. The detective gave her a stern look and went back to making notes. Aye, that I am, and who might you be? I apologise for my bad Geordie accent. He asked with his back to her. He had a strong Geordie tone, but there was a twang of a Glaswegian in the way he spoke, as if he had spent time further north and never quite shaken the accent. Lola Montes, Elysium Liaison Office, she said, pulling out her credentials and throwing them to the detective's assistant. The detective did not turn, but she could picture the grimace on his face. ELO agents were seldom welcome when they were out in assignment, since they outranked most, if not all, local police. It was typical ego trip that Lola had seen 100 times over, and she was used to the routine. She just had to wait for the detective to finish measuring his dick before he would concede authority to her. Well, Lola, that sounds like a stripper's name, he said sarcastically, yet again without turning. Well, that's what my daddy wanted me to do. Unfortunately, I've got no sense of rhythm. So he had to settle for his little girl joining the ELO, she said with equal amounts of sarcasm. I don't want to be here any more than you want me to be, but you've got to make use of me while I'm here, okay, she said. She walked over to the dais and pointed to the camera and aimed in the dance floor's general direction. We got any footage from that? She asked the detective. All CCTV was fried. The electronics just seemed to explode spontaneously. We'd be lucky to get a crayon drawing out of what's left, but we've sent it all down to forensics just in case, he explained. There's only one thing powerful enough to fry a whole security system, Barnabas whispered in her ear. She ignored the voice, but heeded the words he spoke. She was not stupid, and she could tell that the detective was not stupid either. By the look in his eye, he was gauging her, seeing how she would react and if she would give anything away. Lola was perfectly willing to share what she knew with him, but only when she understood what they were dealing with. What about witnesses? You got any of those? She asked. The detective grunted and gestured for her to follow him. He led her across the scene of carnage and towards the wreckage of the bar area. Leading her toward the far end of the bar, he opened and held a door that came out into the cold storage room inside a well-built young man in a torn suit sat shaking and nursing a large whiskey. His skin was as pale as freshly fallen snow, and beads of cold sweat ran down his forehead, dripping onto the stone floor. His clothes were torn and ragged as if he had been fed through a shredder without his skin being touched. His hair was as red as blood, and his face was deep in his hands, his mouth emitting small moans. Here he is. He's your problem now, the detective grunted. The redhead pulled his hands away from his face to reveal a pair of mist-coloured eyes, one green, the other grey. He looked tired and run down, and his skin was a sickly yellow as if he had been on a bender from the moment of his birth and never stopped. Shit, do you know who that is? Barnabas asked. Lola shook her guitar case, silencing her companion once more. Name? She asked. The man did not answer, but he just sat still, nursing his whiskey as he shook against a chill felt only by himself. Whatever he had been through had left him a shadow of what he probably had been. Puck, he replied. With stark realization, she understood just who it was that Barnabas had been so excitable about meeting. The legendary Red Wolf himself sat before her. She was unaware how to feel about this, given that her people hated him so much. She had read of his exploits during the War of the Wild Hunt as a part of mandatory reading in school. If this was the same guy that was called the Demon of Dallas and the killer of the Cuban coast, then something was terribly wrong with the histories. Thank you. Yeah. So,
Helen, you're on mute.
Yeah. So please unmute yourself now. I'm saying that as realising. And let's have another round of applause for S.G. Mulholland and the Tales of Robin Goodfellow.
Thank you.
I really like the way you introduced Puck at the end there.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, no, that was really good.
Yeah, sorry, I was sort of, I'm not used to reading aloud, so I'm stumbling over my words a bit. Do apologise.
You did really, really well then.
Really well.
I don't think you've got anything to worry about.
Thank
Very
you.
enjoyable.
So now I met our next guest reader a few years ago at my writing and self-publishing workshops at Spalding Library. We kept in touch, and over the last few years, he's been working on his. We're not sure whether it's going to be a novel or a novella at the moment, but his work, his piece, and it has memorable characters and humorous anecdotes. Can't say that properly. So we're currently pulling it together, ready for publication. So will you please make some noise for Terry Roberts, reading from his tale of how an accident changes the life of one man in Ward 27B. And many thanks for muting yourselves during the reading. So let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to me. This is the chapter. It's called Sam's chapter. It's spelt as in Sam because the guy is a Philippine gentleman, and it's narrated by a guy called David who had an accident and is in a ward in a hospital with various other characters, and I'll pick it up from there. So far, I have possibly portrayed Sam Matu as simply our poor hapless victim, a mercilessly bullied chap unable to defend himself. The truth is never as straightforward as initial impressions. Yes, I was sure that sing-along Cockney John was using him for entertainment and that Sam wasn't his newly found friend for life that he would have Sam believe he was. But I also learned that Sam, to some extent, was his own worst enemy, too eager to please others, thus leaving himself open to exploitation or on at least one occasion, injury. As far as I can make out, Sam came to England in the 1980s to work in a restaurant that a distant relative was supposedly opening in London. Even if it was a genuine attempt at setting up a business, it quickly became apparent that it wasn't going to happen. After a period of several years, working wherever he could find accommodation, Sam ended up in Rockfield. Despite being a smallish man, Sam was very fit and strong. He had been a good boxer back home in Quezon City, but never had the backing to get big fights in the US or anywhere outside of the Philippines for that matter. His strength and agility found him plenty of work over the years in the building industry. This was sometimes as a labourer for bricklayers, but mainly Sam was a scaffolder. I dread to think of the abuse and racism that he would have faced back in those even less in line times, but I bet he would have just smiled and gone with it. One day during lunch break, in the poor site's porter cabin, his work colleagues sat and read the latest tabloids to join the pile strewn across the table. One in particular caught their attention. Now, I wasn't actually there to witness any of this, but bear with me. I think this is a decent stab at how things would have progressed back then. "Come here, Sam," said Phil. "She'd be right up your street, mate." Bob chimed in with, "She's a bit on the little side for me, but she's definitely from your neck of the woods or thereabouts." "You all look the same to me," Jim said. "Same sort of eyes as the Chinese and all that." "Sam's not Chinese," Phil said. "He's from the Philippines." "I know, but he's from that way on," Jim said. Anyway, enough of that, and then onto the part that I know now to be true, having heard the story from two of the parties involved. As you may well have guessed, the picture they were showing Sam was on page 3 of the newspaper in question. Filipino Kim will bring smile to him, was the text in bold beneath a picture of a half-dressed and undeniably beautiful young woman. There was next some diatribe about how the lady of the house should brighten their spouse's day by showing them the picture of Kim, and how as a result both parties' day would improve. The article ended, "We are reliably informed that Kim hails from Rockfield." Now Sam was and still is something of a gentleman, and refused, or at least made a play of refusing, to look at the picture. They all went back to work and nothing more was said on the subject. The problem was that Sam couldn't stop thinking about Kim from the picture. He'd been on a couple of short sort of dates during his 2 year spell in Rockfield. Anyone who met Sam couldn't help but be charmed by him, but his struggles with language and inherent shyness meant that nothing had come of any of these approaches. He needed to meet someone he could chat with in confidence. Kim would be perfect. He decided to try to track her down. He didn't ask any of his colleagues at work for help. Sam realised that would only end up with him being relentlessly teased and led on wild goose chases. What he decided to do was go to what he saw as the source. He secretly took the newspaper with Kim's photo in it home to the B&B he was currently lodging at. When he got home, he tore out the page with Kim's picture on it, folded it up and put it in his wallet. Now, this next bit must have taken every bit of bravery that Sam possessed, given his shyness. He went to every newsagent, petrol station, or any other place that sold newspapers. Remember that back then supermarkets didn't exist on the scale that they do nowadays, and certainly didn't sell newspapers. That would have seemed ridiculous. At any establishments that did sell papers, Sam would wait until he was the only customer and approach whoever was working there. He would make a small purchase, often some Tic Tacs or a packet of Polos, and then ask for a little favour. What you have to understand is that by waiting for any of the other customers to leave the shop or whatever, Sam had sometimes given the wrong impression. The vendor would think that given Sam's lack of inches, that he wanted to purchase a magazine from the top shelf and needed assistance. When faced with this and protesting strenuously that he didn't want the dirty picture books, he then had to backtrack somewhat when he produced the clipping from his pocket and asked, "Do you know Kim?" This mainly got the reference that the ladies on the top shelf magazines were in a slightly different division to those on page 3, and that it was highly unlikely that it would find Kim in any of them. Sam would flap and fluster and in broken English explain that he didn't want to find her in any magazines. He wanted to find her in real life, in Rockfield. "My country," he said, and he tapped his chest with his thumb. "Congratulations." "Are they all like that?" or similar would be the reply he got. Like that all the time, but one time he got lucky. Sam was always uncomfortable when he showed someone a semi-naked picture of a girl, but with a female it was nearly impossible. Sam, though, had invested too much time in his pursuit of Kim to give up. He purchased some Polos and fruit for a change, then took his picture out of his wallet. He'd just stopped shaking enough to unfold it when another customer entered the shop. A gust of wind blew the paper out of his hand. The next couple of minutes changed Sam's life forever. Sam crawled along the floor and reached out to retrieve the picture of his real-life Holy Grail, but he was too slow. The man had picked it up. Fortunately, the tall elderly gentleman who had just entered the shop had seen it. He trapped the paper under his foot. After the briefest of glances, he said, "Oh, Ligaya, bless her." Sam then started in vain, trying to explain that Ligaya, or Kim as he had until that moment knew her, was his cousin and that he was looking for her. The man with the picture in his hand didn't believe Sam, but could tell that there was something very important going on as far as the little chap on the floor was concerned. Sam went into extreme detail about how the rest of what happened, but to put it simply as possible, he got really lucky. The fellow who had made the capture was a Mr. Henry Fawcett. He was a retired civil servant who formerly worked in the Foreign Office, but had returned to Rockfield almost 20 years ago. One of the countries that his work involved him in had been the Philippines. Not only that did he know about Sam's former homeland, but he spoke Tagalog. From this extraordinary piece of good fortune, Sam found out that Henry lived 2 doors away from Ligaya and her aunt. She was called Ligaya, not Kim, and had only done the photo shoot to send some money home to her parents after being trafficked into coming to England to do work as a clothes model. Sam got to meet Ligaya, with Henry as chaperone a week later. Henry was a proper gentleman. Even though he implicitly trusted Sam's motives, he still wanted to make sure that the little lovely Gaia came to no harm. Ultimately, Sam was allowed to spend time alone with Gaia, whose name means happiness. How appropriate was that, given that this was to become the future Mrs. Matoo? Her brush with fame is long since forgotten. She was known as Kim then, and to the people who would have no doubt spent time admiring her lustre after, well, to them, Sam would just say, we all look the same, don't we? Thank you.
Right, brilliant. So fantastic. So please unmute yourselves and put your hands to work for Terry Roberts and Ward 27B. Okay. Well, it's come to that time now where I'm going to wind up the session with the reading from the Zardoth Imperative Clanship, which sounds a bit long-winded, but the Zardoth Imperative was the original title of the novel, and I'm using it as the series title now. So, so this is the book concerned. Oh, that's a bit better. Right, and there is we come to a bit of a perilous situation here as the human and Zardothi Marines tried to wrest back Zardothi clanship, the Bakel, from the control of the Kiai and ultimately the Voth. So, okay. Okay, so this is from chapter 9. And the chapter title is Eventful Conversations, but there are quite a few actual events going on as well in here. So the first scene is happening pretty much, you know, around the same time as at Duras Labour Camp compound office on the planet Declane. In the pallid mist of dawn, Grus was the last and largest of Declane's 3 moons to set on the undulating horizon. Chabu Restik cast an idle glance through the window at the compound. What he saw made him check and look again. What's that female doing? She's got everyone doing those exercises. The prisoners each stood apart, facing the Zardothi female, as she demonstrated a graceful form of exercise. The rest of the prisoners who'd arrived 2 days ago, plus most of the Declani and Zardothi prisoners, followed her lead. Even the few Kiai prisoners had joined in. They moved their limbs and bodies in circular sweeps and curved swoops. Trask, find out what those prisoners are up to. Trask, Chabu's sometime firing squad leader, sipped his morning cup of gruff, perched on a stool in the corner of the room. Yes, sir. Trask lifted a hand in a half-hearted salute. He's probably annoyed that his drink will get cold. It needn't take long, Chabu added. Take your drink with you. Trask left, cup in hand. Bleens later, bleens are like seconds for the Kiai. He was back. Sir, you should see for yourself. Chabu finished his own cup and went outside. The prisoners copied the movements of the Zardothi female who led the exercises. They moved as one. Chabu crossed to her. What's going on here? Morning exercises. We do them at this time every day on board our ship. They help us get ready for work and maintain our health. Chabu was taken aback. Is this some kind of trick? Not at all. Why not join us? Now, Chabu was completely nonplussed. The female was young and for a Zardothi had a serene expression completely at odds with her war gear. Are you being facetious? Certainly not. You and your men are welcome to join in or just watch if you prefer. This is healthful exercise and will benefit any humanoids. We all have the same type of musculature. May I restart? Chabu was dumbfounded. Her courtesy was the last thing he'd expected, and it wrong-footed him. Then he realised she awaited his answer. Yes, restart. He stood aside to give her room. I'll watch. Thank you, she said, and bowed. Take up Shotokan horse stance, everyone. She followed this with instructions for a series of movements which she demonstrated first. Chabu was impressed by the discipline of her followers. Even the newest members of the group, the Declain and several disgraced Ki troopers, managed the positions and sequences. He watched as she moved among them, correcting a foot position here or a gesture there. She's a good instructor. And then it hit him as she demonstrated the next movement. They're practicing some form of fighting, but it looks like a dance. He stood and watched a few harblines longer, then nodded as an acknowledgement of her status within the camp as an instructor, and turned back towards the ramshackle cabin he and his troops occupied, which doubled as the compound office. His steps were slow and thoughtful. He paused at the door to watch sunrise gild the dunes out in the desert. Well, Trask asked, as Chabu stepped through the door, what do you make of it? Just some form of exercise, maybe from the place the humans come from, Chabu said. Nothing to worry about. She invited all of us to join in. Trask looked surprised. Did you accept? Chabu wondered if his own expression had been as comical. No, but you can if you want. Aware that their conversation was probably being monitored, he added, though it's about time you got the water out for them and sent the workers out to the factory and mine. Plenty of time to join them tomorrow morning. And the next scene is set in the shuttle in the Bekel's shuttle bay. It's just landed, and they're going to try and take the Bekel back. And this is around the same time. As Omar watched on his SimTank feed, the holograms projected above the comms console. The Marines, human and Zardothi alike, crowded round to watch as well. The Ki troopers waited outside the shuttle. They fidgeted with their weapons as if ill at ease. The longer they had to wait, the more they toyed with them. Finally, one said, I don't like this. They should be back by now. He approached the shuttle, his disruptor raised. I'm going in. The others hung back. The troop leader raised his disruptor. Stay here. That's my friend in there, one of the troopers outside told their leader. I'm going after him. Fool, the leader said. They've obviously all been captured or killed or something. We were told to guard the shuttle, so that's what we'll do. Gorch, do you not think we owe it to them to at least find out what happened to them? No, if we stay here, we stay alive. And you know what the Voth do to troops who don't obey orders. The other trooper held his arm out, palms up. Whatever we do, we're damned, he said. I'm going anyway, and he walked towards the ramp. Before he even got there, blue flame engulfed him. As it flashed out of existence, it revealed nothing left of the trooper but a small pile of ash where he'd stood. A little smoke rose from it and danced in the air currents from the shuttle bay's ventilation system. He's not afraid to shoot, Omar said, even his own men. So a little bit later, get down, Omar said. He's firing at the door. They joined the Ki prisoners on the floor. Burning his way in, Olga whispered. He's got a job on his hands then, Chaz muttered. I heard these holes are all triple-skinned. Not this door, Omar murmured. We rigged it up in a hurry. Ah. With a clunk that ricocheted off the walls, a chunk of the upper door hit the cockpit floor. Omar kept one eye on the SimTank feed. He hasn't come in. What's he doing? More sense than the others, Chaz whispered. The outer compartment lit up with brilliant blue. He's firing into this room. His disruptor's probably on a wide beam setting. We use it on board to reduce the risk of damage to the ships, Omar said. Still dangerous, though, if it touches you. We'll have to take him out. Olga eased herself up on her knees to keep below the damage to the door. Cover me, Chaz. She put up her stun gun up against the bulkhead. Chaz raised his stun weapon and sighted through the hole in the door at the Ki. Olga fired through the false bulkhead. The stun bolt ricocheted around the cockpit. The Ki collapsed on the floor, but his disruptor fire streamed through the hole and hit Olga in the face. She keeled over as the blue flame seared her head and upper chest off. The cautery wound was neat, a rind of spacesuit layers sealed to charred flesh and bone. Olga, Chas gasped. Thank you so much. Okay. Right. Bit of a gritty one, that. Okay, so hope all of you fabulous listeners enjoyed all of that.
Yeah.
And many thanks to all our lovely authors and readers. That's Carol, Chuck, writing as Andrew Sweet, Sandra, Steve, writing as SG Mulholland, and Terry for joining me. And thank you so much to for our lovely friends and family and other authors who have joined us today, for coming in and supporting us today, and all our readers. And if you'd like to stay and join our chat with the authors after we've finished, you are most welcome to do so. That part won't be recorded or streamed, so if you put your video off, you can safely put it back on then, once I stop the stream and video recording. Right. And authors, if you haven't yet done so, here's a reminder to please include links to your books in the chat, or just send the information on to me afterwards, and I'll post them on my timeline, in the Finger on the Pulse, on my LinkedIn, on my YouTube channel, Helen Claire Gould, and on my website, www.zardath.com. And do please include prices, ISBNs or ASINs, stockists, national, international and local, and your websites too. So thank you for that in advance. And this has been Helen Claire Gould comparing Fiction Fix Online and bringing to your attention both new and established writers in various fiction genres. Thank you so much for joining us. We have one more meeting in this season of Fiction Fix Online, and Debbie will be a guest at it. She's in the audience today. And that's the March meeting. So please join me on Sunday, March the 10th at 5 p.m. in the Finger on the Pulse for the live stream, or on my YouTube channel, Helen Claire Gould, for the Zoom video a couple of days later, probably a couple of days later. Authors and studio audience, if you'd like to join the authors chat after I end the stream and recording, do stay with us. We hope you can do that. So all the slots are filled for the March meeting, but if anybody is watching this and thinks, oh, I fancy having a go at that, then please get in touch with me on Facebook, LinkedIn or Goodreads messaging, or by email to ask for a slot. And if you'd like to read in the autumn season, which covers September, October and November, get in touch. Bye till March. Thank you.